Thank you for joining us, Sharks Perspective, the podcast with subject matter experts in marketing. To A/B test is the question today, and if you like to test and test often, ask yourself if you're testing smarter. Are the results of your tests living in a silo, or are you also looking more broadly and applying those results across different campaigns and channels, even new ones? Caitlin Halpert is a growth engineer at 3Q Digital, and she's a subject matter expert in performance and digital marketing. And on this episode, we'll discuss how to test smarter and not just more often, how to optimize channels, and how to gain actionable results in order to maximize your spend. So let's tune in to a growth engineer with a Shakespearean shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us on A Shark's Perspective today. If you would tell us a little bit about your journey and your career thus far.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Definitely excited to chat today. So I am growth engineer at 3Q Digital, a performance digital marketing agency. We've got offices across the U.S. and I spent many years working in client services and managing paid search and paid social campaigns. And then about a year ago, I moved into a role that's kind of more focused on innovation, new strategies, and building strategies for our new clients based on the problems that they're having. So we're really providing custom solutions that fit their needs.
So if you look at the marketplace today, obviously we're pretty mature in the sense that everybody knows how to do a lot of the paid media well. Obviously, there's a lot to learn, especially with programmatic, media and advertising, display advertising. Facebook's got a long ways to go, but really, when you think about it from a Google perspective, we're doing that fairly well. But at some point, that peaks out, and where do you start? Telling your clients where to go and where to help them achieve growth through other channels once that plateaus.
Yeah, I think that there are so many more channels to
Agreed.
expand to, and the number of channels that exist keeps expanding as well. And I do think that it's individualized, but Google is a great place to start, but you've got to look where your customers are and go to them where they're spending their time online. So maybe it's Pinterest, or maybe it is YouTube. There are a lot of different places that you can expand, and then you can go even more extreme, and there's just more available to digital marketers, even down to, out of home, there are more digital displays that you can buy programmatically. So it depends what kind of business you have, and really just the hardest part is getting a handle on all of the options that you have available and prioritizing based on what you know about your customer.
So obviously, a big important piece of that is going to be testing and seeing what works. So, what kind of guidance do you give people testing? I mean, I think, again, A/B testing is fairly mature today, at least for the most part, but what kind of strategies do you help people with their testing?
Yeah, I think that oftentimes people spend their testing time and energy on really, really granular elements instead of testing larger scale thematic elements. So, for example, if you're on Google and you're doing an ad copy test that's buy now versus buy today in your text ad copy, it's really not going to get you much. And, when you talk about Google being so much more mature today, part of that is that its artificial intelligence, its ability to manage itself has really improved. And so when you're trying to control what ad serves at what time, you're actually making the entire platform perform worse, more likely than not. So I would say really limit your ad testing on a platform like Facebook, and even on a platform like Facebook, while it's not as advanced as Google, it still is doing optimizing, and you might limit your volume. What you should test, though, is how the platforms work, trying to figure out how they are serving ads. How can you maximize your ad serving? And definitely test into new channels. Make sure that you have dedicated budget for testing into new channels so that you're not holding it to the standards of channels that you've been managing
Sure.
for 3-4 years and you've really got on lockdown.
Yeah, we'll go into a little more detail then, if you will, about how you would set it up to perform worse by doing your testing incorrectly. I think that's a great
Yeah.
point.
So basically, a lot of issues that we see is that when people are setting up tests in Google, they're still using rotate evenly, and they're only running 2 ads at once. And our extensive testing at the agency is really in line with what Google says, which is you should use the optimize ad rotation setting, so that allows Google to serve the best ad for the best time, best audience. It's able to figure out which keyword, which query makes sense for an ad at a given time. And then the second part of that is that you're giving that algorithm as many different, like meaningfully different ads to
Hmm.
work with as possible, so that that algorithm actually has power and has a real meaningful difference in that performance to work with, to find all of those different pockets within your targeting that work best for an individual ad. And so using rotate evenly prevents that optimization. We see it drives fewer impressions, and if you're getting fewer impressions, it follows then you get fewer conversions.
Hmm.
So by having at least 5 to 7 ads in an ad group and using the optimized rotation setting, we have found, a 10 to 20% increase in conversions across our accounts. In all of the testing we did across our accounts, we actually didn't find a single place where rotate evenly outperformed using optimize.
But you must have found plenty of opportunities to where your clients did not want you to follow that path. I'm sure you run into many who think they know a lot about testing and then all of a sudden, want to tell you how to do it more often because they hear of, ABT, always be testing. So, what kind of guidance do you give them when you run into that sort of friction that you get from people who want to test all the time?
Yeah, what I try and do is redefine what testing means, because there are broader, bigger tests that I push on them rather than these little tests. And I do try and use data as much as possible. So that's why it's helpful, that we're able to run tests across our entire accounts. That being said, there's going to be clients who still want us to run A/B tests, and we do the best that we can. We'll use add variations to run the test, so it can be a bit more controlled and still enable us to run on optimize and still run a number of ads. But we really try and minimize the test, make sure that any tests that we're running have a real function. So is this language that they're going to use on their site and they just want to use digital to test it? Because if we're not making decisions off the test results, then it's a waste of time. So it's
Agreed.
definitely a challenge to convince clients, but it seems like over time they're coming around. We have been on this talk track for a year now, and it feels like we just have a few stragglers left on our client list that still are talking about A/B testing in the old way, no matter how many times we've tried to explain to them
Sure.
how Google now works.
So across different, channels, how are you typically doing your testing? Do you tend to focus more of your time on the ad itself? If it is it on the landing page or wherever you're optimizing your CRO? I mean, where do you sort of spend more of your focus today?
I would say a lot of our focus is on platform testing.
Sure.
So is Pinterest going to work for us? Do we need to have Instagram story ads? Are there third tier search engines that we need to test out? So a lot of it is about expanding in that area. Or if it's an e-commerce client, are there shopping comparison engines that we need to be on? And I think that a lot of our clients are really focused on growth and volume. And so we constantly need to be finding new sources of conversions to meet that need for growth that they have.
So, what are some of the channels that you've seen recently that have sort of surprised you that are starting to perform really well?
I brought up Pinterest a few times
Yeah.
already, and
Yeah.
that's because I
Is
I
Pinterest one of those
absolutely
channels?
love Pinterest.
Yeah.
I think that what I've been most fascinated by is that it's been really successful for us, not just for e-commerce clients or wedding clients. Sure, it works there. That's kind of bread and butter, but it's worked well for financial clients. We have a bank that has done incredibly well on Pinterest. And it all comes down to really understanding your audience, really understanding what exists on Pinterest. What are people pinning about your product or service, and how are they talking about it, so that you can match that and really speak their language and understand how Pinterest works. And that goes for any platform you're expanding into. You have to understand how it works and how people are using it. Another one would be Quora. We have found a lot of
Mm-hmm.
success on Quora, and you would think,
Sure.
that's boring. They're mostly just text ads in between the question and the answer. But if people are asking about something that your product or service solves, you're right there at the right time when someone is in need of a solution.
Let's go into a little bit more detail on how the bank is using
Yeah.
Pinterest, because I'm excited to hear that kind of story.
Yeah, so using Pinterest to advertise promotions that they're running for savings accounts and different rates that they have. So pretty traditional, you probably call it like display ad content, where it's, here's the rate that you're going to get. The language is a lot more in line with Pinterest, so
Mm-hmm.
asking more questions, having listicles, that sort of thing works really well on Pinterest. And then it's targeting keywords and audiences. It's pretty straightforward. And I think that the most important thing is designing high quality creative that fits the best practices of the platform. So you can't just repurpose. You really have to design specifically for any platform that you're running on and incorporate that understanding of, how people actually use it.
So, what types of tests are you typically seeing perform the best? Is it simple A/B testing? Is it multivariate? What are you sort of diving into and seeing the most success with today?
Our biggest successes that we're seeing when it comes to A/B testing is going to be on landing page and conversion rate optimization generally. So not just the landing page, but through the entire conversion funnel. And that's where we see people tend to not want to invest. They'll invest all sorts of money in sending traffic to their website, but when it comes down to actually making that traffic perform better, they seem really hesitant to invest in that, even if it's just a small fraction of their entire budget. So I would say that optimizing what's happening on your site it's so within your control.
Mm-hmm.
That's the biggest one. We've also seen a lot of success testing different audiences and different segments of audiences, and that would go across any channel that we're running on. They're really figuring out what audiences make sense, and also what audiences you can scale into as you grow.
So, then when you do that and you start looking at different advertising platforms, what are some of the tricks you've seen, with settings like with Facebook or Google or any of those channels that you've seen that can help those campaigns perform better and the results you've seen?
What I think works the best is to really stay on the cutting edge, as lame as that
Sure.
sounds, the cutting edge of the ad units that are available. Um, for example, YouTube recently came out with YouTube True View for Action
Right.
ads. And by creating these ad units that are more aligned with our clients' goals, we've seen really great growth. So Curiosity Stream is a client of ours, and we tested out TrueView for Action ads with them. They were already really heavily invested in YouTube, and they were able to see a huge amount of growth from that, even though it was kind of a mature channel for them. And so you really do have to pay attention to the changes that the channels, the platforms are making, so you can take advantage and be kind of a first mover. But yeah, that campaign was really, really successful for us.
Can you go a little bit deeper into Facebook?
Yeah, for Facebook, there are new ad units all the time as well, and it's kind of this platform that is uh, it manages a lot on its own. It's not as good as Google, but it's getting there. But it's constantly changing, and there's more integration between Instagram and Facebook. So probably one of the newest ones that advertisers are moving into is Instagram Stories. And
Mm-hmm.
that's another one where if you're not designing specifically for Instagram Stories, if you don't understand how people interact with stories, you're going to fail at it.
Agreed. So then let's talk one of the big ones, the sweet spots that so many people love to hone in on, if you will, is brand versus non-brand. And where are you seeing, results vary with brand versus non-brand in general?
Yeah, I think this is a funny one with advertisers that come from really large brands that have a lot of brand equity,
Agreed.
where they can spend, $150,000 a month on Google just on their brand terms. And they get a little addicted to the performance that they see on a last click basis. So, they're spending all of this money on brand advertising, and they really love whatever the $5 CPA that they're getting, but they're hungry for more, and so they try and expand into non-brand, but they call it a failure because whatever CPA they get is going to be more than $5, and that's just kind of a lack of understanding of how all of these pieces play together, and the
Mm-hmm.
fact that you're comparing apples to oranges. You've already invested so much in your brand equity to achieve that $5 CPA on brand, um, that you can't compare that to your $30 non-brand CPA. And that's why I think that really advancing attribution can help show that, because it can help show that your CPA for brand is actually much more than $5,
Mm-hmm.
because you have to count in any of your TV advertising, any of your PR, any of that traditional media that's helping build that brand that so often gets ignored, and you pretend that doesn't exist when
Mm-hmm.
you're just looking at the brand performance. But if you want to grow, it's not going to be from your brand keywords on Google. It's going to be expanding beyond that. And anytime you expand to people who don't know of you, it's going to cost you more money.
So when you look at your advertising and your testing, where do you sort of weigh in on your confidence levels? Because that's obviously, that point at where you feel comfortable making decision, but that can vary all over the board for a lot of people. It's not just simply always the highest confidence level at the most normal, optimal point, where you're going to make that decision. But where do you sort of give guidance on when to call something winner?
Yeah, I think that this is an interesting one, because when you really come down to it as a marketer, our jobs are to make decisions all day long, every day. And they have to be decisions that are meaningful and have an impact. So if it takes, you have so little volume that it's going to take 6 months to get results on an A/B test that you're running, well, that's not a relevant test anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And so to me, it comes down to how you design the test and really thinking about that up front and how much volume is coming through. Because if you're not going to achieve statistical significance within a month, or find a winner within a month, it's probably not going to be relevant, because either the platform will have changed, your competitors will have changed their ads, um, or seasonality will have changed the impact of your test. And so I think that you just have to make a decision at a certain point. And if you don't find a winner in a month, but it's one of those things where you're only going to move forward with one, it's okay to just
Sure.
use your judgment to make that decision. And I think that you just have to make sure you know, and that everyone else knows that you're working with, that certain decisions are based on the data, and some are just influenced by the data, and you haven't really achieved that statistical significance. But you got to make a decision.
Just strictly related to testing, what kind of verticals do you see that are I don't know, the most forward thinking in their testing? Who are the leaders that would really,
Yeah.
just sort of surprise us thinking, this vertical knows how to do that well?
Yeah, I think that the companies that really test well and have that testing mentality are really the ones that are disrupting their industry. So it could be across any industry, but if they're really changing the way that it works, um, then that can make a, a big difference. I would say, if I had to break it down to a category, I really think that mobile apps are really data oriented and
Mm-hmm.
tend to do testing well and be really invested in a testing culture internally.
Agreed. I had the pleasure of hearing you speak at a conference. I'm just kind of curious, what did you get out of that conference? What do you enjoy about speaking at marketing conferences?
What I really like about speaking at conferences is meeting really great new people. That's how I met you, and that's why we're
You're
talking today.
welcome.
So that's always fun. But I really like, sharing ideas, and so often marketers can be stuck in their own little world. And it can be nice to get out of that, where we only work with certain type of clients. And a lot of times at conferences, people who work at smaller brands who don't have access to, the sort of data that we do, the sort of testing and the experience that we do, it can be really great for them to hear the experience of an agency. But I just love public speaking. I think it's really fun.
Yeah, no, you did great. So, Caitlin, are you ready for the 5 most important questions you're going to be asked today?
I'm ready.
All right. So, you're in Burlington. Apple pie or apple cider?
Ooh, apple pie. But I make both at home. We actually have an apple cider press at my parents' house, and every
Oh
fall
my
we press
gosh.
cider from the apples on my parents' land.
Nice. Well, then here's an obvious follow up question: karate or kung fu?
Oh, kung fu.
These are the kind of questions that clients are going to be asking you down the road. You know that. So,
I know.
World Series or NBA Finals?
World Series.
Books or a Kindle?
Both. I can't pick. I really switch between both. I'm reading a book on my Nook right now and a physical book, and I'm alternating between them.
And the most important question you're going to be asked today: biscuits or cornbread?
Biscuits.
There you go. All right, Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Where can people find out more about you, follow your advice and thoughts?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Caitlin_Halpert. You can also see some of my blog posts on the 3Q Digital website, and definitely follow me on LinkedIn. That's where I usually share upcoming speaking engagements if I'm speaking near you in the future.
Awesome. Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you.
So there was my conversation with Caitlin Halpert, a growth engineer at 3Q Digital and a subject matter expert in performance and digital marketing. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, at some point, especially on brand, your growth will plateau on paid search, and then it just becomes an inefficient spend for chasing down more hand raisers. But there are so many more channels to expand to, and the number of channels that exist keeps expanding. You've got to look at where your customers are going and where they're spending their time online. The hardest part is getting a handle on all of the options, but once you do, it can give you a lot more flexibility. Make certain that in order to maximize growth, you test into new channels, and as I've done in the past, make sure to dedicate budget to see how those specific channels will perform. Second, Caitlin is right in that people do too often test too many granular elements. Often it's simply because we can measure that granularity. However, consider testing your ad serving and new channels also. Are there third-tier platforms and search engines that you've wanted to try? Consider testing bigger themes. Personally, I've always believed that these smaller tests should not happen if you cannot take the insights gained from those tests and apply them elsewhere. If you test how one word or phrase performs, for example, and see much higher lift, then consider taking those results of the test and applying those in other places on your site, in other ad groups, channels, and so on. Don't silo a successful test result. Define your outcomes ahead of time and how you will apply a result of that test. It's not always best to test more, but it's always best to test smarter. Third, one of the most important things you can do is to test the channels where your customers land from the traffic that you've driven. You can drive additional traffic all day long from a lot of different channels, but if you aren't spending a lot of time optimizing your pages where they land, whether it's directly on that landing page or on your own website, then you're wasting dollars on what is within your control. Test what works and apply the learnings to drive your customers down the funnel. Don't let them eject on something that you haven't paid enough attention to when you optimize to convert. It's crucial to test smarter and optimize. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. I always want to say thank you for trusting me with your time regarding another one of the many components that makes up marketing today. Be a disruptor in testing, but don't cheat on the test. Join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.